Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. In today's video script, there are moments in life when you feel like you're disappearing in plain sight. That was me for the longest time. I wasn't unloved exactly, at least not in the outright sense. My husband was a good man, responsible, steady, the kind of man people pointed to and said, he's reliable. But reliable doesn't always mean attentive, and steady doesn't always mean present. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen, not just by him, but by myself. I had become a shadow in my own home, a caretaker, a planner, a woman who kept everything running smoothly, but who was rarely asked how she felt or what she dreamed about. It's strange how life can feel full and empty at the same time. The house was alive with schedules, with the sound of doors closing, alarms going off, keys being misplaced, and yet the silence between those moments was deafening. I would sit on the edge of the bed at night, reading a book just to fill the quiet, waiting for him to ask about my day, and more often than not, he never did. The routines became our language, and the routines didn't include me anymore. I didn't even realize how invisible I had become until the night everything shifted. It wasn't a planned moment. It wasn't dramatic at first. In fact, it was ordinary, so ordinary that if you had seen it from the outside, you might not have thought twice about it. But for me, it was the crack in the wall. The moment when the life I thought I had built started showing me the places where I was missing. We had friends over for dinner. And as usual, I played the role I knew best, the hostess. I cooked, I set the table, I lit the candles, and I made sure the conversation never fell flat. My husband told stories, laughed, refilled glasses, and yet, even as I sat beside him, I felt like furniture, smiling, nodding, serving present, but not alive. That's when I noticed him. He wasn't supposed to matter in that way. He was just part of the evening. Another guest, someone I had met before but never really looked at. But that night, he looked at me differently, not in a way that was inappropriate or loud. It was quiet, intentional. Like he actually saw me, really saw me, not the hostess, not the wife of his friend. Me, it startled me more than I expected. One glance can feel like a touch when you've been starved of attention long enough. When you're invisible, even the smallest acknowledgement feels like light breaking into a dark room. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I found myself replaying those small moments. A brush of his hand when he passed me the plate. The way his eyes lingered just a second longer than necessary. The fact that he asked me how I was doing and actually waited for an answer. Do you know how rare that had become for me? Someone waiting for my answer? It felt almost foreign, like I had forgotten the language of being cared for. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and confusion. I kept telling myself it was nothing. A look, a question, a passing moment. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I found myself looking in the mirror not just to check if my hair was neat or if my blouse had stains, but to ask myself, who am I now? Who am I when someone notices me? It wasn't about him, not really. It was about what his presence awakened in me. The part of me that had been asleep for so long, the part that wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be touched, not just physically, but emotionally, I wrestled with it. I told myself to stop, to put it away, to remind myself of my vows, my family, the life I had chosen. But the truth is, once you feel that spark again, it's nearly impossible to pretend you don't crave it. One evening, when the house was quiet and my husband was working late as usual, I found myself in the kitchen making tea. The knock at the door startled me. It was him. He had stopped by to return something. He said, but the way he lingered told me it wasn't just about that. We stood there, the silence heavy, the air thick with something unnamed. He didn't cross any lines that night, and neither did I. But the current between us was undeniable. I lay awake for hours after he left, my heart pounding in ways it hadn't in years. It was wrong. I knew that. But it also felt alive. And that was a feeling I had been chasing without realizing it. I started to notice the smallest details, how my body leaned slightly forward when he was around, how my laughter came easier, how I carried myself differently, like I was waking up from a long sleep. The weeks that followed were filled with moments that were small to the world, but enormous to me. A conversation that went deeper than the weather, smile that lingered, a silence that said more than words ever could. I told myself I was strong enough to stop it, that I was only borrowing that attention to remind myself I still mattered. But the truth was harder to admit. It didn't want it to stop. And then came the night when the boundary I had held on to so tightly finally dissolved. It wasn't fireworks or grand gestures. It was simple, almost fragile. A touch on my arm that lingered too long, eyes locking in a way that both invited and warned. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered all the reasons why it was wrong, but I didn't. For one suspended moment, I let myself exist in that space where I was wanted, desired, seen. I won't describe the details, because that's not what this story is about. This isn't about physical betrayal, it's about the emotional cracks that led me there. The truth is, what happened wasn't about him at all. It was about me. About realizing that I had lost myself so completely in my role as a wife, a caretaker, a background presence that I no longer recognized my own reflection. He didn't give me something I didn't already have. He simply reminded me it was still there. The guilt came quickly after, heavy, crushing. I would look at my husband across the table. It's the man who had built a life with me, who trusted me. And I would feel the weight of what I had done pressing against my chest. It wasn't just about the act, it was about the secret, the lie I now carried inside me. And yet, even in that guilt, there was a sliver of clarity. I couldn't go back to being invisible. Not anymore. That realization terrified me, because it meant I had to make a choice. Not between two men. That was never the real question. Choice was between staying asleep in a life where I was fading or waking up and demanding more. Demanding to be seen not just by someone else, but by myself. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The guilt sat with me like a shadow whispering in every quiet moment. But so did the awakening. I started asking myself questions I had buried for years. What do I want? What makes me feel alive? When did I stop asking for those things? Eventually, I sat across from my husband one evening and told him the truth, not the whole story, not in every detail, but the truth about my loneliness, my invisibility, the way I had been disappearing in our marriage. It wasn't easy. His face hardened, his eyes filled with something between confusion and hurt, and for a moment I thought he might walk away then and there. But he didn't. He listened. And in that listening, I realized something. Maybe he hadn't stopped loving me. Maybe he had just forgotten how to show it, the same way I had forgotten how to ask for it. We began this slow, painful work of finding each other again. It wasn't perfect. Some days were better than others. Some nights we argued, some nights we sat in silence, and some nights we found glimpses of what we used to be. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And for the first time in years, so was I. I don't tell this story to excuse what I did. I don't tell it to glorify it either. I tell it because it's easy to lose yourself in the quiet, in the routines, in the roles you play for everyone. Else, it's easy to forget that you're allowed to exist, to want, to need, to be seen. And sometimes it takes a mistake, a painful, messy mistake, to wake you up to that truth. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Don't wait until someone else sees you to remember you exist. Don't wait until a crack forms too. Realize the walls you've built around yourself are keeping you locked away too. Find your voice, ask for what you need. Don't be afraid to be seen, even if it feels uncomfortable at first, because disappearing is easy. But coming back to yourself, that's the real affair. And it's the one worth having.